The autumn rain fell softly over the quiet streets of Maplewood, a peaceful small town in America where people greeted each other by name and life moved at a gentle pace. Inside a modest house at the end of a quiet road, Ethan Carter sat at the old wooden dining table, staring at a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The silence of the home felt heavier than ever. At 32 years old, Ethan was a respected mechanic who owned a small auto repair shop in town. He was known for his honesty, hard work, and willingness to help anyone in need. Yet behind his calm appearance was a man carrying the pain of a broken heart. Several years earlier, the woman he had dreamed of marrying had left him for a richer man, and that betrayal made him believe that love only brought disappointment. The person who understood him better than anyone was his father, Robert Carter, a 68-year-old retired carpenter. Although Robert struggled with a serious heart condition and his strength was fading with each passing day, his greatest concern was not his own life, it was his son's loneliness. One quiet evening, as father and son sat together on the front porch watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and gold, Robert broke the silence. "Ethan," he said gently, "when I look at this house, I remember your childhood laughter. Now all I hear is silence. I worry about who will sit beside you when I'm no longer here." Ethan looked away, unable to hide the emotion in his eyes. "Don't say that, Dad. I still have you." Robert gave a small, knowing smile. "But one day, you'll need someone who chooses to stay, not because she has to, but because she loves you." A few weeks later, Robert's health suddenly worsened, and he was admitted to the hospital. Ethan refused to leave his father's side, spending every night sitting in the uncomfortable hospital chair, hoping for more time. One rainy evening, a nurse approached him. "Mr. Carter, there's someone here asking for you." Confused, Ethan stepped into the hallway and saw a young woman standing near the window with a bouquet of white flowers in her hands. She had gentle brown eyes and a nervous expression. "Are you Ethan Carter?" she asked softly. "Yes," Ethan replied. "Who are you?" "My name is Emily Parker. Your father asked me to come." Ethan's expression changed instantly. "My father brought a stranger into my life?" Emily lowered her gaze and spoke with a trembling voice. "He wasn't trying to control your future. He only wanted his son to find happiness again." She took a deep breath, looked into Ethan's eyes, and whispered, "Your father said you needed a wife." And I told him he was right. For a moment, the world around Ethan became silent. The walls around his heart, built from years of pain and loneliness, began to crack. But what he did not know was that Emily had entered his life carrying a secret that could either heal his wounds forever or break his heart all over again. Ethan stood frozen in the hospital hallway, unable to take his eyes off Emily. The words she had spoken echoed in his mind. A complete stranger had walked into his life and claimed to understand the loneliness he had spent years trying to hide. Part of him wanted to walk away, but another part was curious about the woman his father trusted so deeply. "Why would you agree to something like this?" Ethan asked quietly. "You don't even know me." Emily held the bouquet tightly and looked toward the hospital window where the rain slowly slid down the glass. "Because I know what it feels like to lose faith in people," she answered. "A few years ago, I lost my husband in a car accident. After that, I shut everyone out. I stopped believing that life could bring happiness again." Ethan's anger slowly faded. For the first time, he saw that the woman standing before him was carrying pain just as heavy as his own. "My father never told me any of this," he said. "He didn't want to force anything," Emily replied. "We became friends at the community center. He would talk about you often, how hard-working you were, how kind you were, and how you gave up your own happiness to take care of him." Before Ethan could respond, a nurse rushed into the hallway. "Ethan, your father is asking for you." They both hurried into Robert's room. The old man smiled weakly when he saw Emily standing beside his son. "You came," Robert whispered. Emily gently held his hand. "I promised I would." Robert looked at Ethan with tired eyes filled with love. "Son, I never wanted to choose your future. I only wanted to remind you that your heart is still alive." Tears filled Ethan's eyes as he held his father's hand. "You should have trusted me to find my own way, Dad." "I did," Robert answered with a faint smile. Sometimes people simply need someone to open the door before they are brave enough to walk through it. For the next few days, Ethan continued visiting the hospital, and Emily often came to check on Robert. They shared small conversations over coffee, exchanged stories about their pasts, and slowly discovered that their wounds were strangely similar. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself smiling without forcing it. Emily brought warmth back into his quiet world, and she began to feel a sense of peace she had not known since losing her husband. But just as their hearts started to heal, a person from Ethan's past returned to Maplewood with a shocking reason, and her arrival threatened to destroy the fragile connection Ethan and Emily had built. A few days passed, and the quiet moments Ethan and Emily shared at the hospital slowly became the brightest part of their difficult days. They would sit together in the small hospital cafe, drinking coffee and talking about their lives. There was no pressure between them, no promises, and no expectations. Only two wounded hearts finding comfort in being understood. Ethan began to see a side of life he had forgotten. Emily's kindness, patience, and gentle sense of humor brought warmth back into the emptiness he had carried for years. For the first time since his painful breakup, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow. One afternoon, Ethan returned to his auto repair shop after spending the morning with his father. As he opened the garage door, he noticed a familiar luxury car parked outside. His heart immediately grew heavy. Stepping out of the car was Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had broken his heart years ago. She looked almost the same as he remembered, elegant and confident, but there was sadness in her eyes that had never been there before. "Ethan," she said quietly, "it's been a long time." He remained still. "What are you doing here, Sarah?" She lowered her eyes. "I came back to apologize." Ethan gave a cold smile. "After all these years?" "My marriage failed," she admitted. "The man I left you for wasn't the person I thought he was. I spent years regretting my decision." Those words reopened old wounds Ethan had worked hard to close. He remembered the nights he questioned his worth, the loneliness and the pain of being abandoned by someone he trusted completely. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," Ethan said calmly, "but that chapter of my life is over." Before Sarah could respond, Emily arrived at the garage carrying lunch she had prepared for Ethan. The moment she saw Sarah, she sensed the tension between them. Sarah noticed the kindness in Emily's eyes and quietly asked, "Is she the reason you've moved on?" Ethan looked at Emily, and for the first time, he did not hesitate. "She isn't the reason I moved on," he said softly. "She is the reason I remembered that I deserved to." Sarah nodded with tears in her eyes, realizing she had lost him forever. As she drove away, Ethan believed the past was finally behind him. But later that evening, Emily received a phone call that turned her face pale. The secret she had been hiding for years was no longer safe, and Ethan was about to discover a truth that could change everything between them. That night, Emily sat alone in her small apartment, staring at the phone that had just rung. Her hands were shaking, and for the first time since meeting Ethan, she looked genuinely afraid. The caller had been from a hospital in another city, asking her to return immediately. Something from her past had resurfaced, something she had tried very hard to bury. She closed her eyes as memories returned. Years ago, after losing her husband in a car accident, she had discovered she was pregnant. But due to complications, she lost the child only a few months later. That loss broke her completely. She left her old life, moved from city to city, and avoided forming any emotional attachment. Meeting Robert Carter at the community center had been the first time she felt human again. The next morning, Ethan noticed Emily was unusually quiet. They met at the hospital as usual, but her eyes avoided his. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked. "I need to tell you something," she replied softly. Before she could continue, Robert's condition suddenly worsened, and doctors rushed into the room. Ethan was forced to step outside, anxiety taking over his thoughts. When things finally stabilized, Emily was still standing in the hallway, her face pale. Ethan, she said slowly, I have to go back to Chicago. There are some medical records. Things I never told anyone. Ethan frowned. What kind of things? Emily's voice broke. About my past, about why I truly left my old life behind. Ethan felt a knot in his chest. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid that if you knew everything, you would look at me differently. Ethan took a deep breath, struggling between confusion and concern. I don't even know what you're hiding, he said, but running away now doesn't feel like the answer. Emily looked at him with tear-filled eyes. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It finds you when you least expect it. Before Ethan could respond, she handed him a small envelope. Just in case I don't come back soon, she whispered. Then she walked away, leaving Ethan standing in the hospital corridor holding something that felt heavier than paper. Inside the envelope was a letter and a name written on a medical report that Ethan had never seen before, yet it connected directly to his own father's past in a way he could never have imagined. And at that moment, everything he believed about Emily began to change. Ethan stood in the hospital corridor long after Emily had left. The envelope in his hand felt heavier with every passing second. When he finally opened it, his eyes scanned the document slowly, trying to understand what he was looking at. Inside were old medical records, hospital discharge papers, and a letter written in Emily's handwriting. But one line on the document froze him completely, a reference to a car accident case from years ago involving a man named Robert Carter. His breath caught. No, this can't be right, Ethan whispered. The papers suggested that Emily's late husband had been treated in the same hospital where Ethan's father had once worked as a consultant volunteer after retiring. There was a mention of Robert Carter being present during the emergency response coordination that night. Ethan's mind spiraled with confusion. Why was Emily connected to his father's past? Why had she never mentioned this before? Later that evening, he confronted Emily when she returned briefly to the hospital. What is this? He asked, holding up the papers. Why is my father's name in your records? Emily's face went pale. She looked like she had been expecting this moment for a long time. I didn't want you to find out like this, she said quietly. Then tell me the truth, Ethan replied, struggling to stay calm. Emily sat down slowly, her hands trembling. After my husband's accident, she began. Your father was one of the people who stayed at the hospital that night. He wasn't just a visitor. He helped me get through it. He held my hand when I thought I couldn't survive the pain. Ethan listened in silence. He didn't just know me at the community center, she continued. He was the reason I started volunteering again. He told me that broken people still have purpose. Ethan lowered his gaze, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't fully name. So all of this, meeting me, my father planned it? Emily shook her head quickly. No. He only asked me to visit him because he was sick. Everything after that happened naturally. A long silence filled the room. Ethan felt torn between gratitude and betrayal, between believing in fate and questioning everything he knew. I don't know what to think anymore, he admitted. Emily looked at him with tears in her eyes. Then don't decide right now, she said softly. Just ask yourself one thing. Do you feel something real between us, or not? Before Ethan could answer, his phone rang again. It was the hospital. His father's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse. Ethan rushed back to the hospital without another word. The city lights blurred past as he drove, his mind caught between fear for his father and confusion about Emily. Everything in his life felt like it was shifting at once, as if the ground beneath him was no longer stable. When he reached Robert's room, doctors were already inside. Machines beeped faster than usual, and the atmosphere felt heavy. Ethan stood near the doorway, watching his father struggle to breathe. For the first time, he saw not just an aging man, but the fragile truth of time itself. Dad, Ethan whispered, stepping closer. Robert slowly opened his eyes. You came. Ethan held his hand tightly. I'm here. Don't talk, just rest. But Robert shook his head slightly. No, listen to me, he said weakly. There isn't much time. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. Don't say that. Robert gave a faint smile. I lived a full life, Ethan, but I worried about yours. Every single day. Outside the room, Emily stood silently, watching through the glass. She didn't enter. She knew this moment belonged only to father and son. Robert continued, his voice breaking. You met her, didn't you? Ethan looked down. Yes. A soft relief appeared on Robert's face. Good. She is not part of a plan, Ethan. She is part of your healing. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Robert's grip weakened, but he forced the words out. I didn't bring her into your life to control it. I only prayed that someone would remind you how to live again. A long silence followed. Ethan felt a deep ache in his chest. Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning? Robert's eyes softened. Because some truths only grow into understanding when you live them. A monitor alarm beeped louder, but Robert's expression remained calm. Promise me one thing, he whispered. Anything, Ethan said immediately. Don't close your heart again, not because of fear and not because of me. Ethan couldn't speak. He simply nodded, tears falling freely. From outside, Emily watched as Robert slowly turned his gaze toward her. She understood without words what he was trying to say. A final breath filled the room with silence, and then everything stopped. Ethan's world collapsed in that single moment, leaving him standing between grief, love, and unanswered questions about the woman who had quietly entered his life through his father's last wish. And now, he had to decide whether to push her away, or finally let someone stay. The silence after Robert's passing felt unreal, as if the entire hospital had lost its sound. Ethan stood frozen beside the bed, still holding his father's hand, even though he knew the life had already left it. The machines were turned off, but the echo of their beeping stayed in his mind like a memory that refused to fade. Emily remained outside the room, her hand pressed against the glass. She did not enter immediately. She knew grief was a private storm, and Ethan was standing in the center of it. After a while, Ethan finally stepped out. His eyes were red, his expression empty. He's gone, he said quietly, as if saying it louder would make it more real. Emily nodded slowly. I'm so sorry. Ethan didn't respond. He walked past her and down the corridor, unsure where he was going, only knowing he couldn't stay in that moment any longer. Later that night, Ethan sat alone in his father's house. The living room felt different now, colder, heavier. Every object reminded him of Robert's presence. The rocking chair near the window was still slightly turned, as if waiting for him to come back. Emily arrived quietly after some time. She stood at the doorway, not stepping inside without permission. I didn't want to leave you alone, she said gently. Ethan didn't look at her. Everyone leaves eventually. Those words hung between them. Emily took a slow step forward. Your father didn't leave you. He prepared you. Ethan let out a bitter breath. By bringing a stranger into my life? Her eyes lowered. He didn't bring me to replace him. He brought me because he believed you deserved someone after he was gone. Ethan finally looked at her, his voice cracked. And what do you believe? Emily hesitated, then answered honestly. I believe I didn't expect to care about you, but I do. The room went still again. Ethan struggled with everything inside him, grief for his father, anger at being guided without consent, and a strange emotional pull toward the woman standing in front of him. I don't know how to trust anything right now, he admitted. Emily didn't move closer. She simply nodded. I'm not asking you to trust everything, she said softly. Just don't shut the door completely. Outside, rain began again, tapping gently against the windows. And for the first time since his father's death, Ethan didn't feel entirely alone, but he also didn't know if he was ready to let anyone stay. The days after Robert's funeral passed in a quiet blur. Ethan moved through them like a man carrying a weight he could not set down. People from Maplewood came to offer condolences, but their words felt distant, almost meaningless. What he truly felt was absence, an empty space at the table, at the porch, and in every corner of the house where his father used to exist. Emily stayed nearby, but not too close. She understood Ethan's silence was not rejection. It was grief trying to reorganize itself. She helped where she could, bringing food, arranging small things at the house. But she never forced conversation. One evening, Ethan found himself sitting on the porch alone, staring at the same sunset his father used to watch. Emily slowly walked out and sat a few steps away, leaving him space. "He used to sit right there," Ethan said quietly, pointing to the empty rocking chair. Emily nodded. "I remember." A long pause followed before Ethan spoke again. "I keep thinking, what if I had listened to him earlier? What if I had tried harder to understand him?" Emily looked at him gently. "You did understand him. That's why you're hurting this much." Ethan shook his head. "No, I only heard him. I never truly listened." His voice broke slightly. "He tried to prepare me for life without him, and I kept pushing him away." Emily didn't interrupt. She simply let him speak. After a moment, Ethan turned toward her. "And you were part of that plan." Emily lowered her gaze. "I never wanted to be a plan." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "That's what confuses me the most." The honesty between them hung in the cool evening air. Ethan stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. "I don't know who I am supposed to be right now. Everything feels changed." Emily stepped closer this time, but still kept a respectful distance. "You don't have to become someone new overnight," she said. "Just don't disappear into your pain." Ethan let out a slow breath. "I don't even know if I'm strong enough to move forward." Emily looked at him steadily. "You are," she said softly. "You just haven't started yet." That night, for the first time since his father's death, Ethan didn't push her away completely. He didn't invite her in either, but he allowed her presence to remain, like a quiet possibility instead of an intrusion. And somewhere between grief and uncertainty, something fragile began to form again. Not love yet, not trust fully, but the smallest beginning of healing. The morning after that quiet conversation, Maplewood felt unusually still. Ethan woke up early, but instead of going to his workshop, he stayed inside the house, moving slowly from room to room. Every object carried a memory of his father, and for the first time, those memories didn't just hurt. They softened something inside him. Emily arrived later that day, holding a small envelope. She didn't enter immediately. She stood at the doorway, watching Ethan through the open space between them. "I found something," she said carefully. Ethan glanced at her but didn't speak. After a moment, he stepped aside, allowing her in. Emily placed the envelope on the table. "It's from your father. The hospital kept it safe and gave it to me after everything." Ethan's expression changed instantly. His fingers hesitated before touching it, as if afraid of what might be inside. Slowly, he opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Ethan, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer there to say these words myself. I know you will be angry at first. You may feel I interfered in your life. But my son, I never wanted to control your path. I only wanted to make sure you didn't walk it alone forever. I saw how you closed your heart after your pain. I also saw how strong you still are underneath that silence. When I met Emily, I did not ask her to fix you. I only asked her to remind you that life still has warmth waiting for you. Do not blame her for my wishes. She came with kindness, not obligation. And Ethan, if love finds you again, do not punish it for my absence. Your father!" The room felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Ethan held the letter tightly, his hands trembling. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan whispered, "He really believed I could still be happy." Emily nodded softly. "He never stopped believing that." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. The anger he had been carrying didn't disappear completely, but it began to lose its sharp edges. "I don't know how to forgive all of this," he admitted. Emily replied quietly, "Then don't force it. Just don't let it turn into distance between you and life itself." Outside, the wind moved through the trees gently, as if the world itself was giving them space to breathe. And for the first time since everything changed, Ethan didn't feel trapped between the past and the present. He felt something unfamiliar but important beginning to grow. Acceptance, not of what happened, but of what might still be possible. After reading his father's letter, Ethan stayed quiet for a long time. The paper was still in his hands, slightly crumpled from how tightly he had been holding it. Emily remained seated across from him, not speaking, not interrupting. She understood that some emotions do not need answers immediately. They only need space. Ethan finally placed the letter on the table. "I spent so many years believing I was fine alone," he said slowly. "I told myself I didn't need anyone. But now, I realize it wasn't strength. It was fear." Emily listened carefully. "I was afraid of losing people again," Ethan continued. "So I stopped letting people get close enough to matter." A silence followed, heavy but honest. Emily nodded gently. "That kind of silence feels safe, until it starts feeling empty." Ethan looked at her. For the first time since everything began, his gaze wasn't defensive. It was tired, real. "I blamed you," he admitted, "even though you didn't force your way into my life." Emily lowered her eyes. "I never wanted to be the reason for your confusion." Ethan shook his head slightly. "But you were part of something bigger. My father, his wishes, everything. It all came together too fast. I didn't know where to place my emotions." Emily took a slow breath. "You don't have to decide anything about me right now," she said. "I'm not here to replace anything in your life. I'm just here, if you allow it." Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. "I don't even know what allowing someone in means anymore," he said quietly. Emily gave a faint, understanding smile. "It starts small," she replied, "like not shutting the door when someone knocks." Ethan let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but softer. "That sounds easier than it feels." "I know," she said. Outside, the late afternoon light slowly filled the room, warming the old wooden walls of the house that had seen so much silence. Ethan looked around, then back at her. "I don't want to rush this," he said finally. "Whatever this is, I don't want to lose control of it again." Emily nodded. "Then we take it slowly." For the first time, there was no tension between them, only uncertainty shared equally, and a quiet understanding that healing was not a moment, but a process they were both still learning how to live through. The next few weeks passed in a calmer rhythm, though nothing in Ethan's life felt fully normal again. He returned to his workshop, fixed cars, dealt with customers. But something inside him had changed. The silence was no longer empty in the same way. It felt less like punishment and more like space where he was slowly learning to breathe again. Emily didn't overstep into his life. She visited occasionally, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just sitting in the small office while Ethan worked. They didn't always talk about deep things. Often, it was small conversations, weather, repairs, simple everyday moments that slowly rebuilt familiarity between them. One afternoon, Ethan was repairing an old pickup truck when Emily arrived earlier than usual. She stood at the entrance, holding a small folder. "I think you should see this," she said. Ethan wiped his hands and took it. Inside were old photographs. His father at the community center, smiling with people, volunteering, and one photo in particular caught his attention. Robert sitting beside Emily, both of them laughing during some event. Ethan stared at it longer than he expected. "I never knew he was so involved there," he said quietly. Emily nodded. "He didn't just visit. He became part of the place. People really trusted him." Ethan's voice softened. "He always told me he was just passing time there." Emily gave a small smile. "He was doing more than that. He was helping people who had no one else to talk to." Ethan looked back at the photo again. Seeing his father like that, alive in a different way, made something inside him shift. "I think I misunderstood him more than I realized," he admitted. Emily stepped closer, but not too close. "Most of us understand people better when they're gone," she said gently, "because then we stop expecting them to explain themselves." Ethan placed the photos down. "I don't want that to be the case with you," he said suddenly. Emily looked at him, slightly surprised. "I mean," Ethan corrected himself, "I don't want to only understand people when it's too late." A quiet pause followed. Emily replied softly, then don't wait too long to ask the right questions. That evening, Ethan found himself standing outside his house for a long time. The air felt different, less heavy than before. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was moving through life just to survive it. And somewhere in that silence, he realized something important was changing. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. He wasn't just remembering his father anymore. He was starting to live again. Winter arrived in Maplewood quietly, covering the town in a soft white layer that made everything look calmer than it truly was. Ethan stood outside his workshop one morning, watching his breath turn into mist in the cold air. For the first time in months, the thought of another day didn't feel heavy. Inside the shop, things had become familiar again. Customers came and went, engines roared and settled, and life moved forward in small, steady steps. But emotionally, Ethan was no longer the same man who once closed himself off from everyone. Something inside him had loosened, slowly, carefully, like ice beginning to melt. Emily entered the workshop later that day, brushing snow off her coat. She didn't speak immediately. She simply observed Ethan working, noticing how different his presence felt compared to when she first met him. "You're quieter today," she said finally. Ethan looked up, faintly smiling. "I think I'm just not fighting my own thoughts as much anymore." Emily nodded as she stepped closer. "That's progress," she said. Ethan leaned against the workbench, wiping his hands. "I used to think moving on meant forgetting. Now I realize it just means learning how to carry things without breaking under them." Emily's expression softened. "That sounds like something your father would have said," she replied. Ethan looked down for a moment, then nodded. "He taught me more than I ever understood while he was here." A comfortable silence settled between them. After a while, Ethan spoke again, more honestly than before. "I used to think you were just part of his plan," he admitted, "but now I see you were just part of what came after." Emily didn't respond right away. She let the words settle. "I never wanted to be a replacement for anything in your life," she said gently. "Not your father, not your past, nothing." Ethan met her eyes. "You're not," he said simply. "You're just here." That was the first time neither of them tried to define what they were becoming. No pressure, no labels, no expectations. Just two people slowly learning how to exist in each other's presence without fear. Outside, snow continued to fall, quiet and steady, covering the town in a fresh layer of stillness. And for Ethan, it no longer felt like isolation. It felt like a beginning that didn't demand urgency, only patience.